The unexpected war. The air smelled like burnt metal and dust. Fires flickered in the ruins of what was once a proud city. Smoke curled through the sky, blocking the pale light of the distant stars. Screams had faded. Only the sound of distant gunfire and the slow groan of a collapsing building remained. Elias crouched behind a fallen structure, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands. His muscles ached, his body covered in dirt, but his mind stayed sharp. He wasn't supposed to be here. No human was. This wasn't their war. But war had a way of pulling in those who didn't belong. His orders were clear: find survivors. Extract if possible. If not, leave them. But when he heard the weak whimper of someone struggling to breathe, he knew he couldn't ignore it. He moved carefully, stepping over rubble, his sharp eyes scanning the ruins. His gaze locked onto a figure trapped under a fallen beam. It wasn't human. A girl, or at least, what looked like a girl, was pinned beneath the wreckage. Her skin was pale, almost silver in the firelight. Long, dark hair stuck to her face, damp with sweat and dirt. And her eyes, wide, glowing faintly blue, stared up at him in shock. Elias had seen aliens before, but this one was different. She looked defeated. Not just wounded, but completely drained of life. She wasn't fighting. She had already given up. Her thin arms trembled as she tried to move, but she didn't even cry for help. She just stared at him, waiting, expecting, to be left behind. Elias sighed. Just my damn luck. He slung his rifle over his back and knelt beside her. Hey, can you move? No response. She barely blinked. Are you hurt? He tried again. Still, no answer. Her breathing was shallow, her body covered in bruises and scratches. She looked weak, starved. She had been here a while. Elias looked at the debris pinning her leg. It was too heavy for her, but maybe not for him. He planted his feet, gritted his teeth, and pushed. The beam shifted slightly. He pushed harder, his muscles screaming in protest. The girl gasped as her leg was freed, but she still didn't move. Elias crouched beside her again. Come on. I didn't just do all that for nothing. She blinked slowly, looking at him like he was something impossible. A human. Helping her. Can you walk? He asked. She shook her head, barely. Elias sighed. He didn't have time for this. The enemy could be anywhere, and he wasn't about to leave her behind. Without warning, he scooped her up in his arms. She stiffened, startled, but didn't resist. Guess I'm carrying you, he muttered. She weighed almost nothing. Too thin. Too fragile. Like she had been starving for more than just food. As he moved through the ruins, he could feel her staring at him. She didn't trust him. She didn't trust anyone. What's your name? He asked. Silence. All right. No name, then. That's fine. She wasn't just quiet. She was broken. Like she had forgotten how to fight. Elias tightened his grip. He didn't know who she was or why she had been left behind, but one thing was clear: this war had taken everything from her. And he wasn't about to let it take the last thing she had left. Her life. A girl without a name. The night air was cold against Elias's skin as he moved through the ruins, the alien girl still in his arms. She didn't struggle. She didn't speak. She just stared at him with those strange, glowing blue eyes, silent and unreadable. Something about her bothered him, not in a bad way, but in a way he couldn't ignore. She wasn't just injured. She was hollow. Elias had seen soldiers break before. He had seen men stare at nothing after losing everything. That's what she reminded him of. A soldier without a fight left in her. But she wasn't a soldier. She was something else. The girl flinched suddenly, pressing her face against his chest. A second later, Elias heard it too, the low, metallic hum of a patrol drone scanning the wreckage behind them. The enemy was near. Elias ducked into a ruined building, his heart pounding. The girl tensed in his arms, her breathing shallow. He crouched low, his back against a cracked wall, holding her close. "Shoo," he whispered. The drone passed overhead, its red searchlight cutting through the darkness. It paused for a moment, scanning the area where he had been standing just seconds ago. Elias held his breath. The girl's small hands clutched at his jacket, her body trembling slightly, then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the drone moved on, disappearing into the smoke-filled sky. Elias let out a slow breath. Close call. He glanced down at the girl. Her eyes were still wide, but she didn't look scared. She looked resigned. Like she had expected to be caught. Like she had expected to be left behind. Elias shook his head. Not happening. All right, he muttered, shifting her weight in his arms. We need to keep moving. She didn't respond, didn't even look at him. That silence was starting to annoy him. You got a name? He asked. Nothing. He exhaled through his nose. Okay, then. Guess I'll just call you Ghost. Her eyes flickered. A reaction, but only for a second. Yeah, you seem like a ghost, Elias muttered. Not talking. Drifting through a war zone. Pretty fitting. Still, no response. Elias adjusted his grip on her and started moving again, weaving through the ruins. He needed to get her somewhere safe before dawn. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, the only sounds being the distant echoes of gunfire and the occasional collapsing building. Finally, they reached what used to be an old supply outpost, a hidden bunker beneath a wrecked marketplace. It wasn't much, but it was safer than out in the open. Elias set Ghost down gently against the cold metal floor. She winced slightly, but still, no sound came from her lips. He sighed, sitting down across from her. His back rested against a rusted storage crate, exhaustion settling into his bones. All right, Ghost, he said, pulling out a ration bar from his pack. You eat, right? She blinked at him. Elias sighed and broke the bar in half, holding out a piece to her. Nothing. You waiting for me to test it for poison? He asked dryly. Or are you just that stubborn? She stared at the food but didn't move. Elias took a bite from his half and chewed slowly, watching her. See? Not dead. Still, nothing. Elias narrowed his eyes. This wasn't just fear. This was something deeper. She wasn't used to being given anything. With a quieter voice, he said, You don't gotta act tough, Ghost. Just eat. After a long pause, she finally reached out, hesitant, slow. Her fingers brushed against his palm as she took the ration bar. Elias expected her to eat fast, to tear into it like someone who had been starving for days. But she didn't. She took small, careful bites, chewing like she wasn't sure if she was even allowed to. What the hell had happened to her? Elias leaned back, watching her closely. She wasn't just injured. She was broken. Someone had taught her to stay silent. Someone had taught her to expect nothing. Someone had taken everything from her, and left her like this. Elias exhaled slowly. Ghost, he said, his tone softer than before. She looked up, her blue eyes searching his face. I don't know what happened to you, he said, but whatever it was, it didn't kill you. She flinched slightly, as if the words struck something inside her. Elias tapped his chest. I've seen soldiers who lost everything. You're the same. You think you got nothing left. Her fingers curled slightly around the remains of the ration bar. But you're still here, Elias continued. That means you still got something left to fight for. Ghost stared at him. For the first time since he found her, there was something in her eyes that wasn't just emptiness. Something dangerous. Something alive. It was small. Barely there. But it was real. Elias smirked. Looks like I'm right. She said nothing, but her fingers tightened around the food in her hand. A spark. That's all he needed. The fire inside. Elias didn't sleep. He leaned against the cold metal wall of the bunker, his rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the darkness. Ghost, because that's what she was now, whether she liked it or not, sat curled up on the floor across from him. She didn't sleep either. Maybe she was afraid. Maybe she didn't trust him. Or maybe, she just didn't know how to rest anymore. Elias had seen that look before. Soldiers who had been through too much, lost too much. Their bodies still functioned, but their souls never stopped running. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. Then, softly, so soft he almost didn't hear it, she spoke. I had a name. Elias blinked. He hadn't expected her to talk. Ghost stared at the floor, fingers tightening around the ragged fabric of her clothing. Her voice was hoarse, like it hadn't been used in a long time. I don't remember it. Elias let out a slow breath. He didn't push her, didn't say anything. She was talking now. That was enough. Ghost's fingers twitched, and she glanced at him, uncertain. You, don't ask where I'm from. Elias shrugged. Do you want me to? Her lips pressed together. She didn't answer. Elias stretched his legs out, adjusting his rifle. I figure if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me. That seemed to surprise her. Her glowing blue eyes studied him carefully, as if trying to understand him. She had been waiting. Waiting for questions. Waiting for demands. Because that's all she had ever known. Elias smirked. People talk when they're ready. I don't force things. Ghost's eyes flickered again, that tiny spark, but she looked away, curling her arms around herself. A few more minutes of silence passed before she asked, almost reluctantly, why did you save me? Elias exhaled through his nose. Finally. A real question. He leaned his head back against the wall, staring up at the rusted ceiling. You ever hear of a man named Marcus Lee? Ghost shook her head. Best soldier I ever knew, Elias said. Taught me everything. Saved my ass more times than I can count. He paused, tapping his fingers against his knee. One day, in the middle of a battle, he saw this kid. Just sitting there, too scared to move. He didn't think, he just ran for him. Ghost's brow furrowed slightly. Did he save him? Elias let out a dry chuckle. Yeah. Kid lived. Ghost tilted her head. Then why do you look sad? Elias sighed. Because Marcus didn't make it back. Ghost blinked, silent. He knew the risk, Elias said. He knew running out there was stupid. But he did it anyway. Ghost stared at him, unreadable. And, you do the same thing? Elias gave her a lopsided grin. Guess it rubbed off on me. Ghost looked down at her hands. Thinking. Elias let the silence settle again, giving her time. She needed time. After a while, he stood. We should move. Ghost stiffened slightly. Where? Somewhere safer, Elias said, checking his rifle. And somewhere with actual food. Ghost hesitated. He saw it in her eyes, fear. Not of him. Not of leaving. Fear of the unknown. But she didn't argue. She stood slowly, wincing as she put weight on her injured leg. Elias reached out to help, but she flinched, stepping back. Not ready. Elias nodded, pretending not to notice. She would get there. He moved toward the entrance, listening carefully before stepping outside. The sky was still dark, but the air felt heavier. Something was coming. Ghost stepped up beside him, silent as ever. She was small, frail, but there was something new in the way she carried herself. Elias smiled. "Ready, Ghost?" She didn't answer. But she didn't hesitate to follow. The spark in her eyes. The ruined city stretched out before them, silent and dead. Smoke still lingered in the air, drifting like ghosts through the shattered remains of buildings. Somewhere out there, the enemy was hunting. Elias moved carefully, his rifle steady, his ears tuned to every sound. Ghost followed, silent as her name. She wasn't fast, her injured leg slowed her down, but she didn't complain. She didn't ask for help. She just kept moving. Elias glanced at her. She was weak, but she refused to be carried. That, at least, was something. They slipped through an old marketplace, the stalls long abandoned. Burned fruit. Shattered glass. Bloodstains. Ghost's eyes flickered over the scene, her fingers twitching slightly. Elias noticed. Bad memories? Ghost's jaw tightened. She didn't answer. Elias didn't push. They moved in silence until they reached a collapsed bridge leading to the lower district. The path was blocked by rubble, but the skeleton of a broken transport hovered over the edge, just stable enough to use as a crossing. Elias climbed onto the wreckage first, testing the metal beneath his boots. "It'll hold," he muttered. He turned to help Ghost, but she was already moving. Her steps were slow, deliberate. Not clumsy. Not reckless. Elias frowned. She had been trained. He hadn't seen it before, not when she was broken, weak, starving. But now, as she balanced on the twisted metal, he saw it. The way she shifted her weight. The way her hands hovered just right, ready to catch herself if she slipped. Ghost wasn't just some abandoned girl. She had been a fighter once. Elias watched her carefully. If she had been trained, then why had she given up? Ghost reached the other side and exhaled softly. Not relief. Not fear. Just, control. Elias smirked. Not bad. Ghost shot him a glance. I wasn't always like this. Elias raised an eyebrow. No kidding. She hesitated, then sighed. Before the war, I was a soldier. Elias folded his arms. And? Ghost's glowing blue eyes flickered with something unreadable. And I lost. Elias studied her. Not just a soldier. A trained one. A skilled one. She wasn't weak. She had just forgotten what strength felt like. Elias stepped closer. You don't fight anymore. Why? Ghost's hands clenched into fists. She looked away. Fighting didn't matter. We lost. Elias let out a slow breath. There it was. Not just pain. Defeat. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't weak. She had simply stopped believing. Elias looked at the ruined city around them. You think losing means you stop fighting? Ghost didn't answer. Elias took a step closer. You're still alive. Ghost flinched slightly. Elias pointed to her chest. That means you still got something left to fight for. Ghost's breath hitched slightly. Something inside her cracked, just a little. Elias didn't push harder. Not yet. Instead, he turned away, motioning forward. Come on. We gotta keep moving. Ghost followed, her footsteps just a little steadier than before. They found shelter in the remains of an old training facility, one of the many places that had been bombed into nothing. Elias checked the perimeter while Ghost sat by the entrance, staring at the sky. She looked lost. Elias sat down beside her, stretching his arms behind his head. So, you ever gonna tell me your real name? Ghost hesitated. Then, quietly, I don't deserve it. Elias frowned. Who told you that? Ghost looked at him, and for the first time, there was anger in her eyes. Not at him. At herself. I failed. Elias studied her carefully. You think failing makes you worthless? Ghost looked away. Elias scoffed. That's a load of crap. Ghost turned back, surprised. Elias leaned forward. You know what happens when humans fail? Ghost stayed silent. Elias smirked. We get back up. Ghost's fingers twitched. We fail all the damn time, Elias continued. Wars. Battles. Hell, I burned my own food last week. Ghost blinked, caught off guard. That's not the same. Elias grinned. Maybe not. But the point is, failing ain't the end. Ghost swallowed. She looked down at her hands. Then, softly, she whispered, then what is? Elias exhaled, his expression turning serious. The end? He tapped his chest. That's when you stop trying. Ghost froze. Elias leaned back, crossing his arms. You're still here, Ghost. That means you haven't lost yet. Ghost didn't speak. But something changed. A tiny spark. For the first time, she looked like she wanted to believe him. Elias smirked. You ever throw a punch before? Ghost blinked. What? Elias stood and cracked his knuckles. You used to fight, right? Ghost hesitated. I did. Elias smirked. Then let's see if you remember how. Ghost's fingers twitched again, this time, not from fear. Something was waking up inside her. Something dangerous. Something alive. And for the first time, she wanted it back. The first punch. The night was cold, but there was something new in the air, a shift, a spark, something alive. Ghost sat across from Elias, staring at her own hands. They felt unfamiliar. Like they didn't belong to her anymore. She had once been strong. Fast. Unstoppable. But now. Now, she wasn't sure what she was. Elias watched her carefully, his arms crossed. You're thinking too much. Ghost blinked. What? Elias smirked. I can see it all over your face. You don't trust yourself anymore. She clenched her fists. He wasn't wrong. Elias stood and stretched. All right. Enough thinking. Stand up. Ghost hesitated. Why? Because if you want to remember who you are, you're gonna have to fight for it. Ghost swallowed hard. She didn't know if she could. Elias stepped back, rolling his shoulders. Let's start simple. Throw a punch. Ghost frowned. At you? Elias chuckled. Nah, at the air. Come on, let's see what you got. Ghost hesitated, then slowly raised her fists. It felt wrong. Like something broken trying to piece itself together. She swung. It was weak. Off balance. A failure. She dropped her arms, her jaw tightening. This is pointless. Elias shook his head. No, it's not. Ghost clenched her fists again. I used to be better. Yeah. Elias raised an eyebrow. Then show me. Ghost inhaled sharply. Her fingers curled tighter. She threw another punch. Stronger this time. But not enough. Elias smirked. Again. She swung harder. Faster. Again. Her arms started burning. Her breaths grew shorter. Sweat trickled down her temple. Again. She hit harder. Her feet moved instinctively. Muscle memory she thought was gone started creeping back. Her movements were still sloppy. Unrefined. But something was waking up inside her. Elias stepped forward. Now, hit me. Ghost blinked. What? You heard me. Elias grinned. Hit me. Ghost hesitated. Elias leaned forward slightly. If you're too scared to fight, then what's the point of getting stronger? Ghost's jaw tightened. He was pushing her. She hated it. But she hated herself more. She threw a punch at him. Elias dodged easily. Too slow. She swung again. He sidestepped. Sloppy. Frustration burned in her chest. Why couldn't she do this? She lunged forward with a faster strike, but Elias caught her wrist midair. Ghost froze. His grip was firm but not painful. See? Elias said calmly. You're still holding back. Ghost's breath hitched. Someone broke you, Elias said. Made you believe you weren't good enough. Ghost's fingers twitched. But that was a lie. Something cracked inside her. A deep, buried rage. A wound that had never healed. Elias smirked. Now stop fighting like a corpse and hit me like you mean it. Ghost's eyes burned. She wasn't broken. She tore her wrist from his grip and swung without thinking, and this time, Elias barely dodged. His smirk widened. There she is. Ghost took a step back, her breath coming in sharp bursts. That had felt real. Elias relaxed, stretching his arms behind his head. That's enough for now. Don't want you dropping dead before we get out of here. Ghost stared at her trembling hands. Why are you helping me? Elias exhaled. Because someone once helped me when I thought I had nothing left. Ghost's fingers curled into fists. She wasn't fixed. She wasn't strong yet. But something inside her had woken up. A spark. A fire. And she wasn't going to let it die. The chains she chose. The night was silent, but Ghost's mind was loud. She lay on the cold metal floor, staring at the cracked ceiling of the bunker. Her body ached, but it wasn't the kind of pain she feared. It wasn't the kind of pain that broke her. It was the kind that reminded her she was still alive. Elias sat near the entrance, rifle across his lap, eyes half closed. He wasn't sleeping. He never did, not fully. Men like him never truly rested. Ghost turned her head slightly. You fight for money? Elias smirked without looking at her. That what you think? You don't seem like a soldier, she muttered. Elias exhaled. I was. Once. Now. Just a guy trying to survive. Ghost studied him. Then why help me? Elias finally looked at her, his smirk fading into something more serious. Because you remind me of someone. Ghost frowned. Who? Elias leaned his head back against the wall, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. A friend. He thought the fight was over before it even started. Thought he was already dead. Ghost's fingers twitched. She knew that feeling well. Elias turned back to her. I proved him wrong. Ghost looked away. What happened to him? Elias was silent for a long time. Then, quietly, he said, he made it. But he didn't win. Ghost didn't understand. What do you mean? Elias sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He was strong. Tough as hell. But strength isn't enough if you don't know what you're fighting for. Ghost swallowed. She wasn't sure what she was fighting for anymore. She had once known. Her people. Her home. A cause. But all of that was gone now. And yet, she was still here. Elias watched her carefully. Tell me something, Ghost. The ones who did this to you, the ones who broke you. If they were standing right here, what would you do? Ghost's breath caught in her throat. She could see them. The ones who left her to die. The ones who decided she wasn't worth saving. The ones who made her believe she was nothing. Her fingers curled into fists. Elias smirked. There it is. Ghost exhaled sharply. Anger. It had been buried so deep she had almost forgotten what it felt like. Elias leaned forward. That anger. That's not weakness. It's fuel. But you gotta control it. Otherwise, it'll burn you up before you get to them. Ghost swallowed hard. What if I don't know how? Elias grinned. Then it's a damn good thing you've got a teacher. Ghost stared at him, something sharp flickering in her eyes. She had been chained. Not by metal. By the belief that she was already defeated. But now. Now, she wasn't so sure. For the first time in a long time, she wanted to fight. Not just to survive. To win. The warrior they forgot. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying the scent of smoke and blood. The enemy was coming. Elias crouched low behind the shattered remains of a transport vehicle, his rifle steady in his hands. Ghost stood beside him, silent, breathing slow. But something was different now. Her posture wasn't weak. Her eyes weren't hollow. Her hands no longer trembled. She was awake. Elias glanced at her. You ready for this? Ghost exhaled. She wasn't sure. Not because she doubted her strength, but because she had spent so long believing she had none. But now. Now, the fire inside her had returned. Yeah, she whispered. Elias smirked. Then let's give them hell. The first shot rang out. A pulse round slammed into the metal beside them, sending sparks into the air. The enemy had found them. Elias ducked, returning fire in sharp, controlled bursts. Ghost stayed still, her breathing calm. Her hands twitched, waiting. The footsteps came fast, 3 soldiers, armored, moving in sync. Elias swore. Too close. We're gonna have to move. Ghost clenched her fists. No. Elias turned to her. What? Ghost stepped forward. Not running. Not hiding. Facing them. Elias blinked. She wasn't broken anymore. The first soldier raised his weapon, too slow. Ghost lunged. Her body moved on instinct, old training waking up like it had never left. She ducked low, twisting past the first attack. Her elbow struck the soldier's ribs, hard. He stumbled. She grabbed his wrist and tore the weapon from his grasp. The second soldier hesitated, a mistake. Ghost pivoted, slamming the stolen rifle into his helmet, the crack of metal against metal ringing through the night. He collapsed before he could scream. The third soldier raised a blade, too slow. Ghost caught his arm mid-swing, twisting with brutal precision. A snap. A scream. And then, silence. Elias stared. Well, damn. Ghost stood over the fallen soldiers, her breath even. Her hands no longer shook. She turned to Elias. We go now. Elias grinned. Now you're talking. They disappeared into the ruins, moving fast. The war wasn't over. The battle wasn't won. But for the first time, Ghost wasn't running from it. She was running toward it. Because the girl they had abandoned. She wasn't their victim anymore. She was the warrior they forgot. And now, she was coming back.